So, your professor is an aristocratic perennialist who prefers to look along the religions he studies. He's not a democratic, or an inclusivistic, or exclusivistic, or atheistic, or syncretistic person, and he thinks it's a mistake just to look at the religions. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, as I've said several times before, is for you to decide. But you need data to do that. So it's time we left off with preliminaries and began digging into our subject itself. If we're going to compare the religions, we need to know what they actually say. As you know, I've divided up the 7 traditions we're going to discuss into 4 basic groups or families. So here we have a map of the major religions of the world, color-coded to indicate the predominant religious adherents in different parts of the world. We're going to use this diagram. I've mentioned this, tried to describe this in Paths of Return, sort of a pie with 3 slices and then one sort of extrinsic religion hovering around the outside. So down at the bottom, South Asian religion, family number 1. Family 2, the East Asian family of religions. 3, Western. And then outside of the circle, the primal religions. Okay, take this pie and impose it on the map we just looked at, and you get something that looks like this. I guess it really looks more like a bullseye, doesn't it, with the bullseye itself right up there at the northern tip of India, someplace up in the Himalayas, which I suppose is appropriate. Anyway, as you can see, the point of this now is to show you South Asia, this bottom slice of my pie, clearly embraces the subcontinent of India, origin of Hinduism and Buddhism both. The Eastern, East Asian religions are in this slice of my pie, and I've tried to draw this in such a way as to include a big hunk of China. Really, to be thoroughly accurate, this slice of my pie should have scooted over here to embrace Japan as well, but there are limits to this particular template. And then in the West, Western religions, the Western third of my pie, I've drawn in such a way as to include Saudi Arabia, where Islam was born, and then also over here, right at the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea, Palestine, origin obviously of both Judaism and Christianity. So Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Western religions over here in East Asia, China. We're going to talk about Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, and then again down here where we're going to be starting in a moment in India with Hinduism. And then outside of the circle, right outside of the central circle, is the primal category, geographically speaking. And as I mentioned again in Paths of Return, I've tried to draw this in such a way as to include Siberia, coming down a bit of Australia, coming on around sub-Saharan Africa, and then the second concentric circle outside, the outermost concentric circle, drawn in such a way as also to embrace South and North America. All of these being homes of, originally, these prehistoric religions we call primal religions, which we'll be looking at, of course, toward the end of the term as we get to Unit 4. All right, but now let's dig in. Let's start talking about a particular religion, and the place we'll begin is with Hinduism. As I point out here, it's currently the 3rd largest of the world's religions, based simply on numbers of adherents. Little over probably 1 billion followers. I say roughly 1 billion followers, probably a little bit more than that now, and roughly 15% of the world's population. As I point out, in India itself, roughly 4 out of 5, 80% of the people are Hindu. And it's also the majority religion in Nepal. Hindus, many millions of Hindus in countries including Bangladesh, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Malaysia. And if you want to picture those countries, here are several of them anyway. There's India, Pakistan up here to the northwest of India. There's Nepal, Bangladesh. Sri Lanka is a little island down here off the southeastern coast of the Indian subcontinent. And then Malaysia, Indonesia would be down here, actually off of this particular map. Oh, I want to go back here. So notice the symbol right here in the middle, the symbol for Hinduism. It's actually this image. It's the Devanagari script of the ancient Indian religion of Sanskrit for a particular, I can't exactly call it a word. It's more of a primordial sound, the Hindus say, which sounds, you can transliterate it as O-M or A-U-M, and it sounds like a Om. And it's a term, word, sound that's used in meditation practices in different areas, different schools of Hindu tradition. We'll talk about this in detail later on. Actually, if you noticed the other day, last time, in presenting you with a different map of the world's religions, I called your attention to these little icons at the bottom of the map, each representing a different religion: Christianity, Islam. This was Hinduism last time, Buddhism, Taoism, Shinto, Judaism, primal religions. This was the symbol used in this map, and that particular image also is often associated with the Hindu tradition. It's called, here it is up close, a little statue of that particular image, symbol. It's called Shiva Nataraja, or the dancing Shiva. Shiva is one of the gods of the Hindu pantheon. I mentioned this particular god in the lecture you read. And again, we're going to be talking about him and the various gods in much greater detail next time. Anyway, that's the symbol that's used often for Hinduism, but then also the image of Om is characteristically Hindu as well. Different religions take their names from different things. So some are named after the founder of the religion in question. Some religions take their name from the ideal human quality or virtue which they aspire to. In the case of Hinduism, the name for the religion or the collection of religions that goes by that name is geographically based, as I mentioned again in Paths of Return. Hinduism and India, both, the name of the religion, the name of the country, come from, are associated with a particular river, the Indus River up there in northwestern part of the Indian subcontinent, basically along the line between present-day India and Pakistan. And it was a name given to the people of that part of the world by Persian invaders who came into that part of the world from the northwest, from Europe, discovered a civilization already in existence there along that particular river, and began referring to the people and their country as Hindus in India, because of that, because of the name of the river. So the geographically originated name for the religion in question. Hinduism, as you know from my lecture, is like Judaism in being primarily, not exclusively, but mainly the religion of a particular ethnic group, a particular people. And for that reason, historically, Hindus and Jews have tended not to be very interested in proselytizing or evangelizing or getting people to convert to their way of thinking. To proselytize someone, do you know that word? Is to try to convert them to your own faith. And Hindus and Jews have been pretty much of the understanding that the religion they practice is for their people alone. Now, again, there are exceptions. I should probably say there are exceptions to every rule I will propound in this class. This is a introductory class, and I'm being very simplistic in many cases. There are exceptions to this. There are groups within Hinduism that say you can convert to their religion, same with the Jews, but historically, mostly, that's not the case. Hinduism, I think most people agree, is, well, everybody agrees, it's the oldest Asian religion, for sure. The oldest religion from that part of the world, and it may be the oldest of all the historical religions, although Judaism may be a close rival, depending on how you look at this, depending on the authorities that you talk to. Now keep in mind, as I mentioned again in Paths of Return, the primal religions are much, much, much older yet. But of the religions for which we have some kind of datable evidence for their start, calling them historical religions, Hinduism definitely the oldest in Asia, and perhaps the oldest of all. Western scholars tend to date Hinduism's origins back to maybe 2000, maybe even some of them to 2500 BC. When these Aryans coming down from Persia, I've already mentioned these Persian conquerors coming in from the northwest, arrived in the border between Pakistan and India, in this Indus River culture, and merged their own, this is the scholarly opinion at least, the Persians merged their own religious practices with the practices of the people they found there. And in a way, Hinduism is the result of that amalgamation or combination. Now, many traditional Hindus dispute that and say, no, that's just nonsense. That's Western imperialist scholarship, and we don't accept any of that. They would say their religious tradition is much, much older than that. For example, I mentioned in the lecture you read, Krishna, one of the incarnations or avatars of the Hindu god Vishnu. Parenthesis, we'll say a lot more about that later on, don't worry. It's believed, it's said, that Krishna, this particular god, incarnate Krishna, was born, very specifically, 27th of July, 3112 years before Christ. And notice, he, Krishna, was the 8th of these avatars or incarnations of Vishnu. There were 7 before him. And if Hinduism as a religion embraces, as it does traditionally, devotion to, honoring of, belief in all of these avatars of Vishnu, then it's going to go back a lot further than even 3112 BC. Hindus themselves, I mentioned this, don't call their religion Hinduism. They simply refer to it as Sanatana Dharma, that phrase at the bottom of the screen in front of you. Sanatana means something like everlasting, eternal, beyond time, timeless, and Dharma is teaching or law. So the eternal law, the everlasting teaching. So in a way, they don't think that their religion really had any kind of temporal starting point. It's a religion, as it were, descended from heaven, a religion that came down out of eternity and manifest itself on this planet at different points in time. That's their point of view. So how old is it? Well, it depends on who you talk to. It's pretty old, even from the younger estimates, at least a couple thousand years before Christ. So what, 4,000, a little over 4,000 years old at this point. Oh, and I wanted to give you a picture here. There's Krishna, this avatara, this incarnation of the god Vishnu. In his mother's arms, Devaki is the mother of Krishna. You could say if you're Christian, Devaki corresponds to Mary and Krishna to Christ. What Christians say about Jesus, Hindus would say about Krishna. In both cases, they believe these human beings to be incarnations of God. I might mention too, do you notice that Krishna is blue? In Hindu iconographical symbolism, when you picture or paint a god, or a goddess for that matter, their skin is blue. And the idea here is that it reflects the sky, thus reflects the heavens. They come down, they manifest themselves on this planet in human form. Some of them do. Some of them manifest themselves in animal form. But they're always pictured as blue, as reflecting the sky, which was their origin. All right, Hinduism, singular, pretty misleading really. Again, I mentioned this in Paths of Return. Hinduism is just vast, very, very complex set, really, of religious traditions. You really ought to talk about Hinduisms, probably. Far exceeding the complexity of a Western religion like Christianity. Now, we know that Christianity has thousands of different denominations and churches, but Hinduism is even more complicated. Someone has said, I like this quotation, Hinduism is a museum of all religious possibilities. Or rather, since the word museum suggests something, that's dead or outmoded, better say Hinduism is like a magic journey through that museum in which everything comes to life as one passes by. So just about anything you can imagine, some Hindu has done it. The practices are extraordinarily varied. Let me give you examples of that, just quick examples of that. So as I said, Hinduism, very simplistically put, once again, I'm cutting a lot of corners here. comes in three primary forms, which we call Vaishnavite, Shaivite, and Shakta, depending upon which of the gods or goddesses a particular Hindu is mostly devoted to, whom they worship. So Vaishnavites are devoted to the god Vishnu, Shaivites to the god Shiva. Again, we'll talk more about these gods later on. Shaktas to the divine feminine, the feminine form of God, which is called Shakti. All right, so just again, quick examples, quick illustrations of what we're talking about. Here on the right, we've got a procession of very enthusiastic, very devout Vaishnavite Hindus, those who worship the god Vishnu. And I've got a picture here of the world's largest Vaishnavite temple, Sri Ranganath Swami Temple in Sri Rangam. Sri Rangam, show you on the map here, is right where that little red dot is. It's in the state of Tamil Nadu, which is way, way down in the southeast corner of the Indian subcontinent. Anyway, biggest Vaishnavite temple in the world is there, and here are some Vaishnavites in procession carrying an image of, and I'm not sure who it is, frankly. It may be Lakshmi, who's the goddess consort of Vishnu. I'm not really sure who this is. But notice the jubilance, couple of very smiling faces and so forth. They're pretty happy about their relationship with this god, with Vishnu and Vishnu's consort, perhaps. Very different imagery that you get in this next shot. Here's a Shaivite. So again, the Shaivites are devoted to the god Shiva. Shiva is the destroyer god, the transformer god, the god who undercuts and upsets and reconfigures the world. Again, we'll say more about him next time. This particular Shaivite is an ascetic, and he's one of the Aghori sadhus. Sadhu, I should explain this, I guess, pretty quickly. Sadhu is the Sanskrit word for an ascetic. An ascetic is simply somebody who's given up ordinary life in society, no family, no job, who engages in difficult, often extreme forms of physical and spiritual discipline practice. And these Aghori belong to a particular set of sadhus who worship Shiva, and they often spend their time in cemeteries and cremation grounds. Aghori have been witnessed smearing the ashes of bodies that have been cremated on their bodies. And they sometimes take skulls, notice this guy's skull, and fashion little bowls out of the skull that they use then for eating and drinking. And the purpose of all this rather frightening lifestyle is to transcend social taboos, kind of break down all of our conventional social categories in order to experience total unity or total oneness with Shiva, with God. Now, a parenthesis here. You're looking at this and you're going, whoa. And Cutsinger thinks, Hinduism is a valid religion. Isn't this just really bizarre? To say that Hinduism or Buddhism or Islam or Christianity is a path up the mountain toward God is not necessarily to endorse every practice of every Christian or Buddhist or Hindu or Muslim. So I'm not trying to say this is the way to go if you want to be, one with God, sit in a graveyard and drink out of a skull. Christianity has some pretty weird practices. I mean, those of you from Christian backgrounds in my audience, there are very serious, very devout, very severe Roman Catholic Christians in the Philippines who every year during Lent, during Holy Week, engage in self-flagellation, beating themselves. Some of them carry these huge, heavy crosses. They will crawl on their knees over rough ground, and some of them are crucified. There are people that have nails driven into their hands and hung up on crosses for a few hours in order to experience oneness with Christ, to engage in a kind of sympathetic participation in Christ's suffering on the cross. I mean, that's that's pretty extreme and pretty strict as well. So again, I'm not endorsing this. I'm just giving you examples of the variety of things that you find in Hinduism. Or in the case of Shakta devotion, devotion to the goddess. Here are two women, one Anandamayi Ma, died in 1982, and then another one, Mata Amrita Anandamayi Devi, simply often usually referred to as Amma, which is a word that means mother. She was born in 1953. She's still on the planet. These are two Hindu women who are regarded by many of their disciples as themselves incarnations, manifestations or expressions of the goddess on earth. And this Amma in particular, I've got friends who have actually gone to see Amma. Amma is famous for hugging. You go to see Amma, and she embraces and hugs people who come to see her. She's like reputedly hugged like, I don't know, 30 million people now or something like that. She goes all over the world. I mean, she comes to this country, and hundreds and thousands of people show up. And people talk about a sudden just inrush of compassionate energy when she holds them. And the devotees say, well, this is a manifestation clearly of the divine that's coming through this human being. So there are two examples of what the Shakta dimension of Hinduism might look like in contemporary dress. All right. Apart from my geographical pie diagram, trying to sort out the religions we're going to be studying geographically, I also borrowed from my friend Houston Smith the idea that the historical religions, South Asia, East Asia, Western religions, can be understood with respect to the problems which they seek to address and to solve. I'm not going to say what I said in the lecture you read in detail, but just to say very simply, South Asia specializing in self, East Asia specializing in society, and the West specializing in our relationship with the natural environment. We'll be opening this up and fleshing this out a bit more as we go through these religions. But let's start with the Hindu tradition and try to say a little bit more about what this means. According to Hindus, the supreme goal of human life, well, really of all life on this planet, is what they call, Sanskrit word, moksha, which can be translated as liberation or freedom. And I'll be talking again in more detail about what moksha entails, its implications and so forth as we move along in a future lecture or two. Getting to that goal, they say, depends upon each of us becoming keenly aware, deeply aware of the many selves and the various kinds of self which exist in society, so in the world around us, different kinds of folks, different people, but also the different selves within each of us. Now, I'm not sure you've ever thought about it this way, but at least according to Hinduism, all of us have multiple personalities going on within us all the time. I'm one person with respect to my family. I'm another person with respect to my students. Maybe I manifest a different side of myself to somebody else. All of us are kind of multiple personalities. And then also becoming finally keenly aware, deeply aware of the selves in the capital S self. Again, we'll speak more about what this ultimate capital S self might be later on. But this question of who am I? How do I relate to other people? How is myself to be understood externally, internally, etc.? Keenly important, really important for Hindus, which is why they specialize. We can be said that they specialize in the question of self. I gave you this little chart right at the end of the lecture in Paths of Return. Let's expand upon that. I said I would explain all these Sanskrit words that you see here. I talk about the 4 fours. To understand these selves, plural, in society, and the selves in the small s and the selves in the big S self, it's helpful to differentiate when you're talking about Hinduism between 4 sets of 4 terms. There are varnas, purusharthas, ashramas, and margas, and each of those has 4 subdivisions. I put down at the bottom here, It's kind of like, I don't know what kind of a game it would be, but if you combine all these and all the possibilities, you would actually have 256 ways of being a self. Well, I'm not sure that there's any reason to work all that out in detail, but let's definitely look at these terms. Oh, I said, right, it's kind of like getting dealt a hand of cards. Who you are, where you are, what kind of self you have, how many selves are within you. It's kind of like getting dealt a hand of cards. And it's important to know who you are vis-a-vis all of these categories in order to know how best to operate spiritually, how best to move through this world in order to reach the ultimate goal of liberation or moksha. That's the Hindu perspective, at least. Somebody has said, basically the whole religious life consists in how we deal with what we're dealt. And I think the Hindus would like that. So first of all, the varnas. What are varnas? Varnas are your calling in life, your vocation. This is where the traditional Hindu caste system gets its rise. There are 4 of these vocations, 4 of these varnas. There are 4 basic callings in life, the Hindus would say. There are brahmanas, kshatriyas, vaishyas, and shudras. The brahmanas are people whose function in society basically results in their being priests in religious contexts or teachers in educational contexts. Kshatriyas are administrators in times of peace and soldiers, warriors in times of war. Vaishya are the farmers, the craftsmen of a society. And the Shudras are basically, we would call them blue-collar workers, unskilled laborers. And the Hindus like to compare each of these castes or callings or vocations to parts of the body. So the Brahmana are the eyes of society, the Kshatriya the arms, the Vaishya the stomach, and the Shudra the legs. And they want to insist all of these are equally important. A body can't function without eyes or without arms or without a stomach or without legs. We can't function properly. We need all of those parts. And so also does society. Another way to think about this is in terms of what each caste or each vocation works with primarily. So the Brahmanas are working with ideas, the Kshatriyas with people. Management skills would be important for Kshatriyas. Vaishyas with matter, so the sculptor or the another artisan of some kind or a farmer is working with stuff, needs to know how to work with things. And the Shudra is working with muscles in order to carry out the tasks that are necessary to carry society and to make the society work properly. So those are the varnas, those are the vocations, the castes. Here's a picture that kind of reminds you of this in a visual imagery of the parts of the body to which each of these castes correspond. So again, the Brahman, the eyes, the Kshatriya, the arrow is pointing to this guy's shoulder, the Vaishyas, the stomach, the sustenance of society, and the Shudra to the legs, to the service that the Shudras provide for the whole body of society. All right, second of the 4 fours, the purusharthas. These are the aims, the wants, or the goals, which Hindus say each of us, every human being, has. Now, we don't all have all of these goals, but all of them are important. None of them is to be regarded as unnecessary or something to be gotten rid of. They all play a part in human life. But the Hindus would say spiritual maturity consists in prioritizing and in realizing that some of these goals are more important than others. All right, goal 1, kama. Kama simply means pleasure, sensory pleasure, the pleasure that comes from a really good meal, the pleasure that comes from sleeping in late in the morning, the pleasure that comes from sexual experience. This is kama. And again, the Hindu is saying kama has its place in this world. We shouldn't hate the taste of good food. We should enjoy good food. The gods have given us the food that we have to enjoy, to take pleasure in. That's all right. But it becomes a problem if your whole life is dedicated simply to kama, kama, kama. Second goal, second aim, artha. This is success. This is fame. This may mean making lots of money. It may mean, getting some kind of celebrity. It may mean getting power in some sort of occupation or something. This is, again, something that's okay to seek, provided that you put it in perspective, that you have a sense of proportion about it. Then we come to the third aim, want, Dharma. This means, in this context, duty, social responsibility, the goal of being of service to our fellow man. And then finally, the fourth goal, I've already mentioned this word, is moksha, salvation, liberation, freedom, final union with God. Notice what I say over on this side of the screen. I say as you move down, go along that arrow, we're moving to wants that decrease in the speed with which we achieve the goal. So kama can come pretty quick. A brownie gives me pleasure right quick. Takes me a little bit longer to achieve some kind of success in a profession. Longer yet to have an impact on society, doing something good for society long term. That takes a while. Moksha takes the longest to attain. Liberation, salvation, and union with God. But again, as you go down, the speed at which you experience the goal decreases. It takes longer as you go down, but the depth of gratification increases. There's a deeper satisfaction that comes from helping other people than does come from having an extra brownie. That's the point of that comment. Those are the purusharthas, the aims, the wants, the goals. Here's another way of picturing them. So kama, pleasure, focused on just me, I, the ego, what I'm getting out of it. I really am not really focused on anybody else at this point. It's just the self and its pleasure, its sensory satisfaction. Then success, artha, it's again pretty much revolving around me, but it's not just my ego, it's the stuff around me, the stuff I accumulate or my impact or my power or my influence that becomes my concern. Then we go to dharma or duty. Now notice others are more the focus of my concern. And then finally, liberation or moksha, it's God. It's connecting with the infinite that is the object of my desire at that point. So all of these are important, but again, spiritual maturity learns how to prioritize and realizes that the ultimate satisfaction does not come from the lower goals, but from the highest goal of all, which is moksha. Third of the four fours, ashramas, which have to do with the stages of life that we pass through. And here we've got four subdivisions again. There's the brahmacharya, the garhastha, the vanaprastha, and the sannyasa. Brahmacharya literally means a journeyer toward God, but it becomes a term that's used with respect to a student, a pupil, someone who's studying, someone who's learning, somebody who's taking things in order later on in life to be of service to others. And just kind of simplistically, the Hindus say basically you're a brahmacharya till you're 25 years old. So I think probably quite a number of people in my audience are still brahmacharyas. Second stage is the stage of the garhastha, which means literally standing in the house. This is a family man or a family woman, somebody who's gotten married, has some kids, is now involved in making a living, is probably more focused now on the Dharma goal of doing service to others. And you're in that stage of life, they say, for another 25 years until you're about 50 years old. The vanaprastha comes next. This is the forest dweller. We would simply say in our country, in this society, somebody who's retired. They've stopped working, and they're now devoting themselves, if you're a Hindu, not to golf, or to stamp collecting, or I don't know what people do when they're retired, to travel, to going on vacations and so forth. No, traditionally, if you're a Hindu and you've reached this stage of life, which, by the way, was signaled by the birth of your first grandchild. When your first grandchild is born, the Hindu said, time to retire. What you do in retirement is you go off to the forest, either literally or symbolically, in order to become more and more focused, more and more intense in your devotion to God. More and more attention is paid to your spiritual practice at this point in your life. This is a time really to begin growing more fully toward moksha, toward liberation. And then, fourthly, is the stage of sannyasa, which is the stage of the renunciate. This is somebody who has now come back, actually, from the forest, where they've been dwelling for the last 25 years, at least symbolically speaking. They actually come back maybe even to their hometown again. But they're totally changed. They're no longer, Mrs. or Miss or Mr. So-and-so that used to work at the factory or used to be a doctor or used to do this or whatever. They have now become so detached, as it were, from the world and their worldly, integuments, that they're recognized to be a kind of model that other people should look up to as examples of spiritual maturity. I put Paul's Galatians 2:20 there, kind of as a Christian parallel, maybe. St. Paul in Galatians says, "It is no longer I, but Christ who is in me." So in some way, Paul's Paulness, his ego, all the stuff that made Paul a particular, unique, idiosyncratic person has dropped away. And it's really only Christ operating through Paul now that's at stake. Well, that's what's going on with these sannyasa or renunciates. Anyway, you spend time in this stage of life for another 25 years, and I guess symbolically speaking, 100 is understood to be pretty much the high end of anybody's lifespan. So that's your last quarter of life, your last ashrama, if you're a traditional Hindu. Somebody has made kind of a joke out of this, which is kind of fun. Here are actually the 4 stages of life. Stage 1, you read the comics first. Little kid. Stage 2, the sports page. Stage 3, the news. And then finally, when you're in stage 4, all you read is the obituaries. This is not Hinduism. This is meant to be funny. All right, and then lastly, the fourth of these 4 fours that we're talking about, margas. Now we're really getting into the heart of religious practice. Margas are spiritual paths, spiritual methods, spiritual techniques, if you will, which different people, depending on their personality type, their spiritual strengths or whatever, can and should use in order to access, finally, total union with God, moksha. And there are 4 of these again. There's jnana, which is the path of knowledge, bhakti, which is the path of love or devotion, karma, which is the path of work, good deeds, action, and then raja, literally meaning royal, the path of meditation, the path of yoga. Now, I'm not going to say anything more at this point about these particular paths because I'm going to expand on them more fully down the road a bit. But I will leave you just simply today with one image that may take your breath away. So the last of these, again, Raja, the royal path, the royal method of attaining union with God through meditation and yoga. I mean, you all know the word yoga, I'm sure. Here's one way of going about trying to perfect yourself, trying to realize your full potential, trying to attain complete and perfect union with God through the practice of yoga. And I'll just end by saying, don't do this on your own.